Good morning, everyone. Thank you, and welcome back to those who were with us yesterday. And for the newcomers, welcome to Net at Work 2021, a flagship Martin Center event bringing together our member foundations to form the largest gathering of European center-right think tanks. I hope you're well rested and looking forward to today's panels. We'll be discussing important questions of EU international partnerships and the green transition. Don't forget, you can join the discussion by using the hashtag #NetAtWork and asking your questions on the Facebook live stream. But first, I'd like to welcome one of our partners, Dr. Hardy Ostry, the head of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation European Office, who is joining us online to deliver his opening remarks. Dr. Ostry, over to you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues, a warm welcome from the European Office of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung here in Brussels. My name is Hardy Ostry and I'm the director of the CAS European Office. I welcome you all to the second day of the 2021 Net at Work edition, and it is my great pleasure to kick off the second day of this conference, which offers two exciting panel discussions. Before we start, I would like to thank the Wilfried Martens Center for organizing the conference again, the second time in a digital format. We highly appreciate that you made it possible again to bring together the EPP affiliated network to exchange views and ideas and engage in discussions. Thank you very much for that. Thanks also to our friends from Austria and Bavaria of the Politische Akademie der Jungen Volkspartei and the Hans Seidel Stiftung who joined to contribute to the conference just like us. And of course, a thanks to all the participating foundations from all over Europe who joined Net at Work again by organizing all the panel discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, allow me to use these opening remarks to share with you some general reflections. We are holding this conference under the title Preserving Our European House, Healing Our Societies. The title has a rather pessimistic touch, but that's comprehensive given the coronavirus pandemic that has thrown Europe and the world into crisis mode for more than a year already. Exactly 1 year ago, in the second half of April 2020, we had gone through the very first phase and shockwave of the pandemic and were very lucky to observe falling infection rates of the first wave throughout most countries in Europe. At the same time, the number of voices were rising which called for European economic support for those regions and countries that were hit the worst. I don't need and I don't want to retell what has happened in the following month. You have all followed the developments and know what the European leaders decided to bring forward. A financial package that was unimaginable up until then as the biggest milestone. Why I'm telling all this? I do so because I would like to highlight some positive signs of solidarity among the EU member states that were sent out during this time of crisis. The financial package, including the new multilateral financial framework and the recovery fund Next Generation EU from last July, was a great act of European solidarity despite all criticism and problems. A second field where the European Union has proven to act together despite all criticism, which I understand and partially share, was the joint procurement and distribution of vaccinations. I don't want to imagine the devastating impacts of a situation where bigger and richer countries within the EU had bought the vaccines by and for themselves in the first place. I'm glad that the decision was taken last summer to act together. Still, the procurement and the rollout of the vaccination campaign has sparked large criticism and disappointment. I'm well aware, and frankly speaking, also wish we had more and could proceed with campaign way faster. Still, I hope that this feeling of disappointment won't lead to the conclusion that it was a mistake to choose a joint European approach. Let me draw your attention to a third point that makes me optimistic. Although it has taken quite some time, the developments in the meanwhile were partly unsatisfying. The conference on the future of Europe is now about to start. The conference will be a process which opens up many opportunities. If well managed, and if the extent of participation is strong enough to be impactful, I'm personally looking forward very much how the European Union, how its citizens are setting the course after the coronavirus pandemic. Dear friends, you see I'm sharing some rather positive and optimistic thoughts with you. And I know it isn't always easy these days, but I believe a crisis always offers the chance to change things for the better, to preserve the European house and to heal our societies. The two panels that of today are both very future-oriented. We will start with a panel which will deal with the EU's southern neighborhood. 10 years after the Arab Spring, the European Union has now put forward its renewed partnership agenda. Nico Marchetti and Stert Stroobans will discuss the potential of this agenda. Does it enable the EU and its partners in the Mediterranean region to build a strong and stable bond with mutual profits on each side? What are the concrete steps that need to be followed? And also, what are the greatest challenges? Given my own background as former director of CAS in Tunisia, this topic is really one of my great personal interests. The second panel of today will deal with the transition to a smart green Europe. What most Eurocrats refer to as a transition is one of the key areas of development of the European Union. Maria de Grassa Cavallo and Alexandra Stoku are the panelists and will discuss the far-reaching impacts of this transition. The recovery and resilience plans that are currently worked out by the member states are crucial for this. And I'm curious to hear what our two panelists think of the potential of the recovery and resilience plans to push for a smarter and more sustainable Europe. We have an exciting program today ahead of us and in the upcoming 2 days. Once again, thanks to the organizers, and let's start with the discussion. I pass the floor to Aya Hotic, moderator of panel 1. Aya, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Austri. We're going to be taking a short break, and we'll be back in a few minutes for the start of the first panel of the day. Thank you. Hello again, everyone. The following panel was organized in cooperation with the Konrad Adenauer Foundation and the Political Academy of the Austrian People's Party. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Ayla Hotic, a political advisor on Middle Eastern and North African affairs at the European People's Party, who will moderate the discussion on the following topic: the EU's renewed partnership with the Southern Neighbourhood, a path towards more stability. Ayla, we're all ears.
Thank you, Theo. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thanks to our speakers, but also to the Wilfried Martens Center, to the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and the Politische Akademie for organizing this session. Today, we have two excellent speakers with us. We have Mr. Marchetti joining us online. He is member of the Austrian Parliament, chairman of the Young People's Party in Vienna. He's also spokesman for the concerns of pupils and students of the Austrian People's Party. He's primarily active in the fields of education and science. He's also member of the Foreign Affairs Committee and chairman of the Austrian North Africa Parliamentary Friendship Group. We have from the other side Mr. Stroobant, who is with us here in the studio. He is the director for Europe and MENA at the Institute for Economics and Peace. He has specialized in political science, international relations, security and defense, global risk analysis, foresight, and crisis management. As you know, we will be discussing the plan that has been published a few weeks ago called the Renewed Partnership with the Southern Neighbourhood, a new agenda for the Mediterranean. The beginning of 2021 marks a double anniversary when we look to the Mediterranean basin. It has been 25 years that the Barcelona Declaration has been adopted. It opened a new chapter for the European Union and the Southern Mediterranean partners. It's aimed at fostering cooperation and exchange to guarantee stability and prosperity of the region. From the other side, it's been already 10 years that the Arab Spring took place. And since then, the developments in the region have been unfortunately turbulent and volatile. Today, as countries around the Mediterranean are severely impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and will be facing long-term socio-economic consequences, the EU has published this new plan to revamp cooperation with our Southern Neighbourhood partners. In my opinion, it is a very ambitious document. It's a timely one. There is a lot of content inside, especially with the 5 priorities that are outlined in the document and that we will try to discuss with our panels, but we will come back to these details later on. It is clear to everyone that the EU needs to get more engaged in the region, because not only we have a common history, but our futures are interlinked. There are lessons to be learned from the past, but a lot of challenges are awaiting us in the future. So my first question to both of our speakers regarding the so-called renewed partnership with the Southern Neighbourhood, a new agenda for the Mediterranean, how much is there of new in this new document? How realistic is it to have one plan or one agenda for so many different countries with so many different backgrounds and realities? In other words, do you think it is doable? Is it too ambitious, not enough ambitious? And my second question to both of you, do you think it is a path towards more stability and prosperity in the region? Mr. Marchetti, if you agree, we'll start with you. So the floor is yours.
Yes. Firstly, I appreciate the initiative. So I think this strategy faces a lot of important threats and challenges in the region. And I want to point out the chapter Peace and Security in this paper. We have now a decade-long conflict in Syria. We have the issue of the Western Sahara or another long-lasting crisis in Libya. So I think the EU is already the main provider of humanitarian assistance and also security provider. But this paper also shows the ambition to develop a strong and shared strategy to finally solve these conflicts, because it needs a political solution. It's not just solved by humanitarian assistance. Don't ask me if that's realistic or doable to have a common shared strategy on these global political issues, but worth to try it. and it's definitely the right thing to do. Adding to this tragedy mentions another major security threat, terrorism, and especially the phenomenon of foreign terrorist fighters. That's an issue which cannot be solved from a single member state. The investigation after most of the terrorist attacks concerned, for example, in Vienna last year, leads to the conclusion that there are international connections, and we can also solve this problem only on an international level. Or when it comes to returns, we have the problem that we have no bilateral agreements with some of the states of the MENA region. And I think it would be very helpful and more effective if we would collaborate more as European countries and face this problem. Of course, all these security problems are just the symptoms and not the core problems of the region. So I think there is a need of a common strategy to solve these peace and security problems. But I think, and maybe we come to that point later, we need to come to the core points of the region, and they are not security, that's just a symptom. But I think that's a very, very good priority in this paper.
Thank you, Mr. Marchetti. I will give the floor now to our second speaker, Mr. Stroobant. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much also for having me today. Well, is it new? I don't think so. It's clearly in line with the existing European neighbourhood policy, and it's clearly in line also with former execution and former policy that came out of this ENP. And this is a next evolution. So is it new? I don't know. I don't think so. And is it new as an initiative? Well, we need to look at other initiatives, non-EU initiatives that have also been taken into the region, like the Union for the Mediterranean or the Arab Maghreb Union that has been also trying to develop some similar type of initiatives in the past. So I don't think it is new, but it's an evolution of what was already existing. Is it realistic to have only a single approach to the entire region? Well, I think the first question that we should ask ourselves is, what is our southern neighborhood? And what type of, I would say, strategic factors influencing peace and stability are active in this region? Well, I think that the EU southern neighborhood reaches down to Cape Town. And I think when I'm looking at the evolution on peace and stability in sub-Saharan Africa and the connection to the Sahara and to the Sahel region into Northern Africa, we need to look at what's happening on the entire continent. And I would even say that the problems that we are facing in Northern Africa are global problems that we see throughout the world and that are interconnected. So we can approach only this region, but we need to make sure we also interlink it with other regions also influencing North Africa. Now, if you would look at the Global Peace Index, which is the flagship research for the Institute for Economics and Peace, well, you would see that the MENA region has been now for 6 years in a row the least peaceful region of the world. And we see that 19 out of the 23 indicators that we use, well, on those 19, the levels of peacefulness in the region are lower than the global averages. So we are facing the least peaceful region of the world. But what are we also facing? We are facing a region that is politically unstable, that is economically unstable. So if your approach to this region would be just like a blanket approach and you would not diversify countries that are of the region, I think this might lead to a failure. So you need to make sure that you address the needs of each of the different countries and make sure you bring the right solutions, but also local solutions to those countries. So I guess that's where you might encounter a problem. You need to make sure that you address each country's problems first.
Thank you, Mr. Stroobant. I would like to go a little bit into details into the document. According to the World Bank numbers, nearly 2/3 of the people in the Middle East and North Africa region are under the age of 30. The document talks a lot about inclusion of youth and women in different parts of the paper. It is discussed, be it regarding the current pandemic as they represent the most vulnerable part of the population, or their economic empowerment, the education. They're also mentioned in the paragraph regarding migration and mobility, and how important is it to offer a stable and predictable social and economic future, providing genuine opportunities. So my question to you, Mr. Marchetti, as spokesman for the concern of pupils and students of the Austrian People's Party, priority, but also since you are very active as MP in the fields of education and science, how do you think we can really help best the youth in the region?
I think when we're talking about the youth in the region, we're coming closer to the crucial point of all the problems there. Some facts and figures about the youth there. Around 400 million people are living in the MENA region. 60% of them are under 30. The youth unemployment rate is between 30 and 40%. And that means that 80 to 90 million unemployed young people are living in the MENA region. That's a dramatic world record. And because of that, there's also a survey from 2019 which says that 50 to 70% of young unemployed people want to emigrate to other countries. And now I have to be very clear. The main of them is neither climate change or democracy. They just want something to eat and want to have a personal perspective for their life. And that's my kind of criticism of this plan for a renewed partnership with the Southern Neighbourhood. I think it must be priority number one and not just a few bullet points. If we don't solve this problem with the youth and their unemployment and their not existing perspectives, we're facing the next Arabic Spring or massive migratory stream to Europe. So I think if we solve this problem of this young generation, we can have peace there, long-term peace and prosperity in the region. And we could also stop massive brain drain of young, well-educated people, which is also a big threat for the economy in this region. So it's not the core area of all our activities in North Africa. I think we will fail in general.
Thank you, Mr. Marchetti. I'm turning now to you, Mr. Strohband. I have just two small follow-up questions. Again, to go into details regarding the document, one of the 5 priorities is the green transition and digitalization. Could you comment on this? How feasible it is in the region? And we know that this is a European priority goal. Do you think, or can you tell me, how far can the EU impose its own priorities on its partners in the region? And my second question, since we discussed a little bit your security background and military background before we started the session, we have several actors which are involved in the region, and we have somehow, I sometimes call them troublemakers. I'm talking here about, for instance, Turkey and Russia. China is also very much involved in the whole region, but somehow in a different way. The document that has been published by the EU needs also engagement from our partners, and it needs also reforms from their side. Why do you think they should get more engaged with the EU on all the aspects, economically, security-wise, migration, green transition, digitalization, rather than turning to these 3 actors who are sometimes offering different things?
Well, thank you very much. 2 excellent questions. To start with the first one, green and digital. I think you're absolutely right to say that those are EU priorities. The question is, are those really priorities for the region at the moment? So as I said before, this is the least peaceful region of the world. But this is also a region of the world that is heavily impacted by a lot of ecological threats. So my question back to you would be, well, is it really a priority to look forward to the effects of climate change and address them and to go green and digital when, for some of the countries, you invest up to 30, even 40% of your GDP into the violence containment? When you do that, there are no other priorities for your future. You need first, and I think the other speaker has said it also, you need to address the problems that are there at the moment before you can turn to other problems. And I think this is where it becomes difficult for the EU to basically duplicate, to translate their own goals and their own initiatives into this region. So yes, green digital is necessary for the future of the planet, but maybe you need to solve other problems first. Now, to come back to your question about other actors in the regions and their influence, I think we need almost a kind of a theoretical introduction here, and we need to realize that the world of international relations has been changing in the past and is still changing as we speak. I think we left a little bit this very liberal approach to international relations where peace was at the heart, interconnection, economic interconnections is going to bring peace. We are now living in a world where, a much more realist world from an international relations perspective, where competition is again the norm, the rule of international relations. So it is normal to see different actors active in this very strategic and geostrategic region. Now, we are, of course, in opposition, and I would even say in opposition in style, with actors that you mentioned, and you can also bring in the United States in this region. But what I also saw in the past years is that you can be in competition for certain regions and certain problems, but you can also be in collaboration with those partners to make sure that you can achieve, I would say, common goals. And I think this is the effort that the EU has to provide now, is to identify those common goals. Iran, JCPOA, is a good example of this. You can be in disagreement with Russia on maybe other issues like Ukraine, for example, or Syria, but you can collaborate and make sure that you reach a next level, or I would say a revival of JCPOA in Iran. Well, you need to identify the same common goals for the EU and all those other actors in the MENA region also.
Thank you, Mr. Stroobant. You talked about JCPOA and revival of some agreements. I will first ask if we have questions from the floor, and then I will have my last questions regarding this kind of agreement. So, Theo, can you please let us know if we have questions from the floor?
Yes, we do have questions from the floor. The first one is, what can the EU and the Eeas do to ensure their policy aims are met in practice? And the second question is, one of the stated goals of the Southern Neighbourhood program is the creation of a ring of stability around the EU's borders, which would create conducive circumstances for cooperation. However, the reality of the situation now is very different, with instability and fragile governance present at the EU's borders. Can this be considered a failure of the Southern Neighbourhood program? And what needs to be done for the EU to achieve the goal of regional stability?
Thank you, Theo. Mr. Marchetti, I give the floor first to you, and then we move to Mr. Stroobant.
I think if we talk about maybe wrong interpretations in this region in the past or in the present, I think the best example is the Arabic Spring, because I think the Arabic Spring wasn't only or mainly the wish for democracy in the region. It was, as I said before, the poverty of especially the young generation who led to revolutions like that. So I really think that we should think about the main problems of the people and then talk about the problems we like to talk about, like democracy, climate change, and all these things which are very important. But I think that has to be the second step and not the first step, as my colleague said before. And for example, my experience as MP in this region is that also young MPs in the MENA region, they don't feel like sometimes that they have the opportunity to change something. And for example, there was a conference of Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in the Sub-Sahara region, and I could see how impressed they were that young MPs in other countries can change something. And I think if we want to develop democracy and give them also the motivation and the, how should I say that, the feeling that they can change something, then we have to work also with parliamentarians and not only with governments, because most of the young politicians in this region, which we should support, I think, they are parliamentarians and not in the government. So this next generation in politics in the MENA region is in the parliament, and we should support them and develop ideas with them together. And I think this paper is a good basis for that, but we should also match these priorities we set with them, with the next generation, also in politics there. And I think that's the right way to develop this region. And
Thank you, Mr. Marchetti. Mr. Stroobant, your comments, please, on the two questions.
Well, the first question about how this can be met in practice. Well, I think what we are facing here is a policy. Of course, this needs to be operationalized, and projects needs to be developed. And I had the chance in the past to work with, EU delegations in the regions. I had the opportunity to train 200 young Libyans in our concept of positive peace, and this was organized together with the EU delegation through the Committee of Regions here in Brussels also. So those initiatives are all, little bricks, little stone to make sure that we can build a better future in, I would say, for the region. Now, ring of stability, well, when you do the 360 security analysis around Brussels, well, what I see is a ring of instability, that's for sure. And I guess if this would be the scorecard of previous policies or previous European neighbourhood policy, well, I don't think it was successful. We can go to the competition in the high north, in the Arctic, on the Arctic Circle, to the tensions, and renewed tensions today, even in eastern Ukraine or in the east. We can go to the south. I think we just discussed what's happening in Northern Africa or in the MENA region. We have seen what happened in the Eastern Mediterranean, and in the past 4 years, we even had some kind of an enemy in the West also. So it was really a ring of instability. So I think this is showing us two things. First is and Einstein would say that also, I'm really honored to be able to quote him today, it's not because you are going to repeat the same failure that it will turn into a success. So you need to really put, this policy, you need to really put also the entire theoretical approach or almost dogmatic approach for your foreign policy. You need to put it back under an analysis and make sure that this is really going to provide success. And I think, this is also maybe one of the comments of this discussion today. When you look back at the past 10 years, we're not really brought stability to our neighborhood. That's a reality of today. So we need to look at this. The second question we should ask ourselves is, how powerful is the EU to really spread stability in its neighborhood? You spoke about all these other actors. Are we at the same level of power than all those other actors to really influence the government of those regions to become more politically stable, to bring more economic stability, and to create a better future for this region? This is another question we should ask ourselves.
Thank you. I think we have a second round of questions, so I give back the floor to Theo.
Thank you. So the first question is on the topic of energy. How does the EU plan to diversify its energy supply sources in light of the recent developments in the Eastern Mediterranean and Turkey's assertiveness in the region? And the second question is, in the document, there is mention of the rule of law, the fight against corruption, good governance, and how much the EU can allow itself to set this kind of agenda and these kind of priorities for its neighbors, when within the EU, there are countries which are not respecting the rule of law, which are still struggling with corruption and misuse of funds.
Thank you, Theo. So we have two questions, one regarding energy, the other one regarding rule of law. If I may just add a small question regarding the question on energy, do you think that EU should support numerous alternative energy projects in the countries of the Maghreb? And with the tensions rising over the exploitation rights of potential natural resources in the East Med, do you think that the EU should act as a negotiator or mediator between all the concerned parties? So, Mr. Stroobant, the floor is yours.
Well, when it comes to diversification of sources of energy, I think the answer must be built in two phases. First, you of course need to look at fossil energy like oil and gas, and of course ask yourself the question like, who should be the provider of this? Do you really want to keep this dependence towards Russia? Do you want to diversify the, I would say, somewhere in the Mediterranean, coming from the Gulf region? Well, I would say that if we don't, or like the question you ask about supporting, I would say, the construction of a pipeline or supporting projects related to oil and gas, well, if we don't, other will. And so that's, I would say, again, it's a question that we need to ask ourselves. Do we need to engage in this? Do we want to engage in this competition with other actors that will not refrain from really engaging in it, investing in it, and become competitors also to the EU? So that's, I would say, to the first question. Now, when you take the other approach, green and digital, well, to be able to sustain this idea of green and digital, you also need to have access to specific resources, special metals, rare earth. Well, you need to ask yourself, where are those resources located today? Well, either they are located in the underground, in the soil of countries that are already in conflict, and most of the time in conflict because of these resources, or they are underground under very, very fragile ecosystems that we need to preserve to make sure that we have a better future, or a green future. So the question there, how green and how digital can we go, and how systemic is this approach, making sure that we're not going to destroy more than we are trying to preserve. Now, when it comes to not respecting the rule internally, well, that's a fact. That's a fact. We know that, and we need to address also within the EU these actions or these the facts that are not really supporting the basic norms and values of the organization. We know that, and we definitely need to approach this. But what we also need to approach, what we also need to maybe deal with in the future, is to have this even more integrated foreign policy and even more integrated foreign policy approach and representation. Because what I also see in the MENA region that we are discussing today is that a lot of member states are also going to defend and in a very hard and a very, I would say, impressive way their own national interests. So you will see that the EU comes up as an actor and a partner, but also national and member states are going to defend their interests. And I guess this is also creating some form of confusion in the region. But what I also personally think is that, and that might be seen as something negative, something taking away power from us, the fact that when we come up with potential support, we also always link that to conditions. And those conditions are the respect of the rule of law, the norms and values of the EU, forms of political and economic stability. Well, I think we need to stick to this because those are elements, and I think the other speakers said that also, those are elements that are at the foundation, and we find a lot of those elements back also in our IP's concept of positive peace that are building more sustainable and just and equal and peaceful societies. So we need to stick to that because this is key to the development of better and more stable societies.
Thank you, Mr. Stroban. Mr. Marchetti, your comments on the two questions?
Yeah, I would like to focus on the second question. And I think when we talk about to fight corruption or good governance, I think we have to strengthen the institutions. I think we should diversify our dialogue. We should not mainly have a dialogue with governments, between governments. I think it's also important to have a dialogue between parliaments, between civil society organizations. And I think that would lead to a strengthening of institutions. And I think, for example, in Zambia, we had a cooperation with the Austrian Parliament, and we set up a project that the Impact Hub network, that's a startup network, that they found the Impact Hub Lusak, and so they are part of the network. And I think these are small steps, but I think that's important when it comes to strengthening civil society and people on the ground. And that also have positive effects on other problems. So I think strengthening civil society, strengthening the collaboration between the parliaments is a main factor for institutions and having a perspective for good governance and anti-corruption That's my experience. I know it's a bit not the classic way, but I really can feel the impact of these initiatives.
Thank you. I have a small question because you mentioned JCPOA, and there is a topic that I've been following very closely over the past months, and which are, by the way, mentioned in the paper, the Abraham Accords. So the normalization agreement between Israel and some Gulf countries, Morocco and Sudan. Do you think we can build upon it and present an EU new initiative for the region? And how could the EU support the two sides to bring them back to the negotiation table? Mr. Marchetti, would you like to start?
These conflicts in this region, they are global conflicts. And as I mentioned in my first statement, I think it's important that the EU has an opinion and is part of the dialogue and the solution between the other global players. Because, for example, I think Austria is not a big player on that. So the impact of our country by its own in this conflict is not really big. But if we have a shared strategy and we can put all our power together to have a dialogue with Russia or China or Turkey, I think that could have a benefit for a solution. So I think that's a very important point, yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Stroobant, your comment on the question?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, when I look at those Abraham Accords, really settling the dispute between Israel and some Arab states from the Gulf region, I think we need to. It always remembers me on the efforts that the Institute for Economics and Peace is providing in a collaboration with the World Trade Organization, and I see those Abraham Accords more as trade agreements with a peace agreement paragraph in it rather than peace agreements based on trade. I think it is pretty obvious, and this is why I think this type of efforts that we are, or the policies that we are discussing today are always super important, because economic interlinkages are bringing peace, long-lasting peace. Of course, within a framework that we would call positive peace. But I think it is very, very important to have these trade agreements, to have trade going on in the world, because trade is bringing peace. Economic interlinkage is bringing peace. Now, when we come back to the region, to the MENA region, and I think that's a point that has also been discussed earlier today, we need to look at this unity of these economies. And if you would take, for example, a dispute between Morocco and Algeria, if you would look at those economies, they're not compatible as such. And I'm not even talking about the political approach to the situation. You have Morocco that is really focusing on tourism as maybe one of the main provider or the main I would say, point of their own economy, where Algeria will more focus on fossil fuels, for example. So how do you bring these two countries together to get to a trade agreement and eventually maybe to a peace agreement? So I guess this is something, this lack of unity in the region has always been, I would say, a break to the creation of more stability and to the creation of regional integration. So that is maybe something we need to look at and make sure that more unity can be present in the MENA region, create a more homogeneous region, and then I would say that would maybe facilitate this, I would say, peace through trade or trade for peace.
Thank you. I think we have one question from the floor. Theo, maybe you can share with us the question.
Thank you, Ayla. The question is, how does security and conflict resolution play into a successful implementation of this new agenda?
Mr. Stroobant, would you like to start?
Well, I guess this question would need to come in my direction first. Well, I think it's a little bit, you cannot have development without security, and you cannot have security without development. This would be like the one-size-fits-all answer to this question. I think you need to, or we at the Institute for Economics and Peace really have this systemic approach to peace. We see peace as a system rather than a cause and effect. So it's not because you apply a policy that you are going to have an effect. You need to look at it as a system. You need to look at the different inputs to the system and how it reacts, and eventually how it will become more peaceful. And I think, I mean, I spoke before about the percentage of GDP invested in countering violence or countering the impact of terrorism, for example. And this is the region most impacted. So clearly, as I said before, next to violence containment, there are no other priorities at the moment. And of course, we would like to see more political stability and economic stability. And I mean, I'm here as director, regional director for the Institute for Economics and Peace. So I would advocate to invest more into what we would call positive peace and this systemic approach to peace. Through the research that we have produced and we are able to measure and quantify it, we are really distilled the essence of indicators, the essence of actions that is creating peace in a systemic way. Once we did this, next to the fact that we saw increased levels of peace, increased levels of happiness and well-being, we have also seen other positive benefits of a more peaceful situation. And those are economic, social, governance, and even ecological. Just to give you one figure, an increase by 1% in positive peace equals an increase by 3% in GDP. You will have, I would say, more stable inflation rates, more stable credit ratings, exchange rates for your currency. So if you invest in peace, and if you are really looking at high levels of security, human security, but also conflict resolution, and if you create a more peaceful society, automatically you will create more economic development. And you know, when I maybe finish my long answer to this really a short question, when I said before that the MENA region has been at the lowest level, so the least peaceful region for the past 6 years, while we have seen an increase in the levels of peacefulness in the past 2 years after the resolution of conflicts in Iraq and Syria. And when I say resolution, it's basically lower intensity of those conflicts. So if you are addressing security and if you resolve conflicts, you will create peace and you will create economic development. And over the past decades, we have seen globally the levels of peace going down, and this has mostly been driven by conflict, internal and external conflict, in which a lot of the actors that you mentioned before have participated also. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marchetti.
As I said before, I think there is a reason for security problems and there's a reason for instability. It's not coming from out of nowhere. I think the main reason for it is the poverty and the unemployment rate in this region, which is the highest in the whole world. So I think if we want long-term stability, to face this problem first. And just an example, I said the unemployment rate is between 30 and 40% in this region. It's a big problem for young people. And for example, in Tunisia, 67% of the young people are living in cities. So, and if we look at the revolution and demonstrations and all the conflicts, they're all starting in cities. So that's also a factor. So I think it's a right priority, for example, to support the digital transformation and with that to help creating jobs and good jobs for the young people there. I think that's one of the many solutions we provide in this paper to face this problem. So I think that firstly, we have to face the main problems, the poverty, the unemployment rate, and secondly, we have a chance to solve the security problems. I think there's a clear order, and I think that's the right way.
Thank you, Mr. Marchetti, for your comments. We are arriving to the end slowly, so I will just try to summarize very briefly what we discussed and on how the points we agree, basically all. We agree that the document outlines indeed the 5 priorities, which are really important, but maybe we wouldn't put them in the same order. That they are, for instance, Mr. Marchetti, you were mentioning the youth, that emphasis should really be put on the youth and not only some bullet points. Mr. Strohbant, you discussed about the importance of having really stability and conflict resolution, and that this is, of course, interlinked to good governance, to the rule of law, fight against corruption, so our basic values, EU values. I would like once again to thank both of you for your time. I would like to thank our audience, and I give back the floor to Theo now.
Thank you, Ayla, and thank you to our panelists for this great conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now be taking a short 30-minute break. I'll meet you back here at 11:45 for the panel on the transition to a smart, green Europe.